Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so that you never miss any video lesson from RAU'S IAS Study Circle. Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading from your UPSC perspective. Today, let us discuss the important news appearing in the New Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 27th May 2020. The news to be discussed has been displayed on your screen and time stamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. So let's start our today's discussion. Now the first news to be discussed is with respect to India-China border dispute and it appears on page number 1 and also on page number 14. Now both these news represents both side of the story. That is, news on page number 1 presents the Indian side of the story, whereas news on page number 14 presents the Chinese side of the story. Now page number 1 says that the Prime Minister of India reviews LAC standoff with NSA, CDS and 3 service chiefs. Talks on the ground failed to break impasse with China in eastern Ladakh. So the whole problem with respect to border dispute with China is in the eastern Ladakh. And on page number 14 the news reads that Xi meets PLA, that is People's Liberation Army, and urges them for battle preparedness with India. In annual meeting with PLA representatives, Xi orders military to think about worst case scenarios. So we understand that the Chinese president is all prepared to go to war with India with respect to its disputed claim on certain region. And this region here is the Galwan Valley region. Now China boasts its claim on the Galwan Valley region, as according to China it is part of Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. So this particular news highlight about the Galwan Valley region. So here from your prelims as well as mains perspective you must know about the Galwan Valley region and also about Galwan River which flows through the Galwan Valley. Now this Galwan River originates in Aksai Chin and flows to Ladakh and then joins River Shyok. Now River Shyok then joins River Indus. So you must remember this flow of river as Galwan River joins River Shyok and then River Shyok joins River Indus. Further, this news also mentions about Shekatkar Committee report. Now, the news highlights that the Defence Minister was supposed to discuss military reforms as proposed by Shekatkar Committee report. And here the report was with respect to ramping up or improving the border infrastructure of India. So the Defence Minister, rather than discussing about Shekatkar Committee report, end up discussing about the border disputes between India and China, specifically with respect to the Galwan Valley region, which is close to Aksai Chin. So from your prelims examination point of view, this topic gets covered under Indian geography in your prelims examination and in your mains examination gets covered under GS paper 2 as well as GS paper 3. In GS paper 2, it gets covered under international relation, especially with India and its neighborhood relation, that is with respect to China. And with respect to GS paper 3, it gets covered under security, with respect to security challenges and their management in border areas. So this territorial as well as boundary dispute between India and China becomes an important subject from your examination perspective, as we should know the important regions close to Aksai Chin in the Union Territory of Ladakh. Now earlier on 18th May 2020, the Ministry of Defence had approved certain reports of Shekatkar Committee. And this report has been mentioned in the Press Information Bureau. It says that the government has accepted and implemented 3 important recommendations of Committee of Experts under the chairmanship of Lieutenant General D.B. Shekatkar, and this is relating to border infrastructure. So recommendations relating to border infrastructure has already been approved by the Ministry of Defence. So these reports were with respect to speeding up road construction leading to socio-economic development in the border areas. Further, the government has implemented recommendations of the committee to outsource road construction work beyond optimal capacity of border roads organization. So as per the report, the government has approved outsourcing of road construction apart from the work which is carried on by Border Roads Organization. Further, it says that other recommendation relating to introduction of modern construction plants, equipment and machinery has also been implemented by delegating enhanced procurement powers from rupees 7.5 crore to 100 crores to Border Road Organization. So the procurement powers of Border Road Organization has been enhanced from earlier rupees 7.5 crore to rupees 100 crore, and this has been done with respect to domestic and foreign procurements. So these were some of the important reports of Shekatkar Committee with respect to border infrastructure which has been approved by Ministry of Defence. Now it's also important to know the location of Galwan Valley region. So here, as you can see, very close to Karakoram range, the Galwan Valley lies, and it is also very close to the Aksai Chin. Now China has been claiming the entire Galwan Valley region as part of its territories. So as of now, this is the dispute with respect to India and China along the Galwan Valley region. Thus, this topic becomes important primarily from the perspective of geography, as you should know about the Galwan Valley region as well as Galwan River, and also with respect to security, as questions may be asked in GS paper 2 as well as GS paper 3 in your mains examination. Now, the next news to be discussed appears on page number 6 in the editorial section. It says oil price pickle. The increased duty on fuel can fund welfare, but arbitrary methods will have implications. So, in the backdrop of declining crude oil price in the international market, this editorial represents two situations. First, should the government reduce the cost of fuel and pass on the benefits to the consumers? Or, second, is that should the government increase taxes on fuel, especially in the present circumstances with respect to the COVID 19 situation? So, these are the two aspects discussed in this editorial. So, in this regard, let us understand both these aspects and their reasons. Now, this topic with respect to declining crude oil prices becomes important from the perspective of your Indian economy in your prelims examination, and in your mains gets covered under GS paper 3. So, this editorial starts by explaining that the present situation on crude oil prices has declined almost by 45% in 2020 as compared to last year in 2019. And this decline in crude oil prices has significantly reduced our import bill on crude oil. And this is significant for India because India imports 80% of its crude oil requirement from foreign countries. So, in this regard, the question remains that should the government reduce the price of fuel given the present situation, or rather, should the government increase taxes on fuel? That is to increase the price on fuel by increasing taxes. So first thing to understand here is that with respect to declining crude oil price in the international market, so India has to pay less as compared to what it used to pay earlier. So because of paying less or because of reduced import bill on crude oil, it has reduced India's current account deficit, and it has also kept inflation under control. Now this is because reduction in oil import bill also reduce cost push inflation, or it keeps inflation under control. Now increase in price of raw material can be said to be one of the factors for cost push inflation, and oil can be said to be one of the most important raw material which is used in different sectors including transport, energy, etc. So overall, we can say that declining crude oil prices in international market has definitely reduced India's oil import bill. So again, we come back to both these questions. That is, should government raise taxes on fuels to supplement its declining revenue amid the present COVID-19 crisis, or should the government pass on the benefits of declining crude oil prices in international market to its own consumers? So in this regard, let us go through the reasons for each of these questions, as it can be beneficial for you to write such an answer in your mains examination. Now first, let us discuss about the reasons with respect to increasing the taxes on fuel, or in other words, increasing the price of fuel in the Indian market. So this news highlights that the central government has recently decided to increase the excise duty on petrol as well as diesel for a second time in last 2 months, and this has been done on account of declining crude oil prices. However, there are still certain benefits with respect to increasing taxes on crude oil despite decline in prices in the international market. First reason is that it helps the government to raise more revenue. That is, raising taxes on increase of taxes helps the government to raise more revenue, particularly when there is decline in tax collections due to COVID-19 crisis. So this can be said to be one of the arguments that it helps to raise revenue for the government. Second reason says that it helps government to raise finances to deal with emergency expenses which can be caused during the present COVID-19 crisis. So the second reason is that it helps the government to raise finances to deal with emergency expenses during the present economic crisis caused due to COVID-19. Further, it says that it helps the government to increase its savings, which can then be used later when the crude oil price increase. So this point highlights that increasing taxes right now when the price has declined will act as a buffer in future times when the crude oil prices increases. And lastly, it says that this decision to raise taxes acts as a de facto carbon tax, and thereby acts as an incentive to give up fossil fuel and adopt more environment friendly and green fuel technologies. So overall, these can be said to be some of the reasons with respect to increase in taxes on fuel. So if a question is asked by UPSC as to why the government should increase taxes on fuel, so you can add up these four important points in your answer. The next question here is that should the government pass on the benefits of reduced oil prices to its consumers? Let us go through the reasons as provided here. First, now because of decline in demand in the economy because of the present COVID-19 situation, there is a slowdown, and reduction in crude oil prices will further boost consumption expenditure and it will help in reviving the economy. So, declining crude oil prices will overall increase or boost consumption in the economy, and this consumption of crude oil in the economy will also help in reviving the economy from the present crisis. Now, another reason highlighted is that as of now, this increase in taxes on fuel puts a very high burden on the consumer, and center's tax alone accounts for almost 45% of the cost of 1 liter of petrol. So suppose if cost of petrol is rupees 70 per liter, then of these 70 rupees, almost 45% of this price, that is close to 30 odd rupees, is a part of tax imposed by the center. Further, there are other state taxes as well. So basically, decline in taxes will reduce the burden on consumers in the Indian economy and will again help in boosting the consumption of fuel in the Indian market. Further, any more increase in taxes on the fuel will further weaken demand in the economy. That is, the demand of these fuel, that is petrol as well as diesel and also other fuels, will decline in the economy. And further, this decline in demand of fuel will further affect industrial activity and investment rates. So overall, decline in demand for fuel will also have an impact on industrial activity and thereby will have an impact on the economy. It further highlights that increase in fuel price, that is increase in tax by the central government, will further put a curb on interstate travel. It will lead to decline in household budgets. It will lead to decline in automobile sales, and this overall will result in loss of jobs. So overall, we can say that all these activities would lead to decline in demand for petrol and diesel, and effectively increase in taxes for the government on fuels may not lead to increase in government's overall tax collection. So these can be said to be some of the reasons as to why benefits needs to be passed to Indian consumers in order to boost consumption expenditure and also to strengthen demand in the Indian economy. So here in this discussion we have represented two sides of the same coin, that is with respect to why the government should pass on the benefits of declining crude oil prices in the international market to Indian consumers, and also as to why the government should increase the taxes on fuel in the present circumstances with respect to the crisis caused due to COVID-19. Thus, this editorial becomes important primarily from your mains perspective under GS Paper 3, and also questions can be asked in your prelims examination with respect to impact of declining crude oil prices in the Indian economy. With this, let's move on to our next news discussion. The next news to be discussed appears on page number 15. It says FSDC, that is Financial Stability and Development Council, to meet on Thursday. So this news highlights that the Finance Minister has called a meeting of Financial Stability and Development Council, which among other things will discuss the impact of COVID-19 on financial sector as well as the economy. So, this particular meeting of FSDC conducted by the Finance Minister shall be the first FSDC meeting after the pandemic outbreak of COVID-19. Now, the topic of FSDC becomes important from your prelims perspective as questions can be asked with respect to Indian economy and in your mains gets covered under GS paper 3, specifically with respect to economic development. So overall with respect to Financial Stability and Development Council, we can highlight that it was set up at an apex level forum in the year 2010 with a view to strengthen and institutionalize the mechanism for maintaining financial stability, enhancing inter-regulatory coordination, and also to promote financial sector development. So this can be said to be the main purpose of FSDC, that is to maintain financial stability, enhancing inter-regulatory coordination, as well as to promote financial sector development. Now, as far as the composition is concerned, the Finance Minister is the chairperson of FSDC. Now, this becomes important point to be remembered from your prelims perspective. Now, other members of FSDC include Minister of State of Finance, heads of financial sector regulators such as RBI, SEBI, PFRDA, IRDA, etc., and also secretaries of relevant ministries as well as departments of Government of India. Further, with respect to the role of FSDC, we can say that the Council monitors macro-prudential supervision of the economy, including functioning of large financial conglomerates, and also addresses inter-regulatory coordination. For example, coordination between SEBI as well as IRDA, that is Insurance Regulatory Developmental Authority, and also financial sector development issues. Further, FSDC also focuses on financial literacy as well as financial inclusion. So these can be said to be the prime function of FSDC. Further, it says that FSDC is also supported by a subcommittee, and this subcommittee is chaired by the Governor of Reserve Bank of India. Now this again must be remembered from your prelims point of view that the subcommittee of FSDC is chaired by the RBI Governor. Further, it highlights that excluding the chair of FSDC, that is excluding the Finance Minister of India, all other members of FSDC are also the members of subcommittee of FSDC, and this subcommittee is headed by the RBI Governor. And additionally, 4 deputy governors of RBI are also the members of this subcommittee. So these can be said to be some of the important information from your prelims perspective with respect to Financial Stability and Development Council, as it is chaired by the Union Finance Minister of India and the subcommittee is chaired by the RBI Governor. So in this regard, let us wait for the meeting of FSDC which shall take place on Thursday so that we know what are its outcome. Thus, this topic becomes important primarily from your prelims as well as from your mains perspective under GS paper 3. The next news to be discussed appears on page number 11. It says, Fisheries Scheme has no relief component. PMMSY plans to double incomes. So this news highlights that even though the Pradhan Mantri Matsya Sampada Yojana, which has been referred here as PMMSY, does not provide for any immediate financial needs of the fisheries sector, rather provides an economic package in response to COVID-19 crisis. So in this regard, this article highlights that this particular scheme of the central government does not address the immediate financial needs of the people belonging to the fishery sector, and also does not talk about any direct cash transfer to people affected in the fisheries sector. Now, according to the government, the Pradhan Mantri Matsya Sampada Yojana is part of a larger reform in the fisheries sector, and this is along with the step taken for Blue Revolution. So in this regard, you must know about Pradhan Mantri Matsya Sampada Yojana as well as its different components, as this particular scheme becomes important from your prelims perspective and questions can be asked in your upcoming prelims examination on Pradhan Mantri Matsya Sampada Yojana as a part of larger reform proposed by the government in the fisheries sector. So in this regard, let us first of all go through the important steps which has been taken by the central government with respect to reforms in the fisheries sector. First of all, it says that the government created a separate Ministry of Fisheries, Animal Husbandry and Dairying in the Union government. So this step provided more focus on each of the sector of fisheries, animal husbandry as well as dairying by the central government. Further, setting up of new and dedicated Department of Fisheries with independent administrative structure. Implementation of centrally sponsored scheme on Blue Revolution, that is integrated development and management of fisheries during the period 2015-16 to 2019-20, and this was with a central outlay of rupees 3000 crore. Another step was to create Fisheries and Aquaculture Infrastructure Development Fund during 2018-19 with a fund size of around rupees 7500 crore, and very recently the government has launched the Pradhan Mantri Matsya Sampada Yojana with an investment of roughly around 20,050 crore, and this investment is the highest ever investment made in the fisheries sector. Now here you must understand that the PMMSY scheme of the central government is a long-term plan for the fisheries sector, and as written in this article does not address any immediate need of those people who are in the fisheries sector and has been hit by the economic crisis of COVID-19, as the scheme does not talk about any direct cash transfer to such people who are in immediate need. So this aspect has been criticized in this particular article with respect to PMMSY. However, from our examination perspective, let us go through the important highlights of this particular scheme as proposed by the central government. Now it highlights that the scheme aims to enhance fish production to 220 lakh metric tons by 2024-25, and this will be done with the help of technology as well as through private player participation. So it highlights that the PMMSY aims to enhance fish production to 220 lakh metric tons from 137.58 lakh metric tons in the year 2018-19, and this overall will lead an annual average growth rate of 9% in the fishery sector. Now, another important aspect highlighted is that this scheme will result in doubling of export earnings to rupees 1 lakh crore and overall will generate about 55 lakhs direct and indirect employment opportunities in fishery sector. However, this will be done in a longer term period for the next 5 years. Another important aspect is that the scheme has introduced the concept of insurance coverage for fishing vessels, and this has been introduced for the very first time by the central government. Further, according to the government, the PMMSY scheme aims to bring about blue revolution through sustainable and responsible development of fishery sector in the country. And to achieve the fish production target of 220 lakh metric tons, the government aims to invest rupees 20,050 crores, and this investment comprises central share of rupees 9,407 crore, state share of rupees 4,880 crore, and beneficiaries contribution of rupees 5,760 crores. Further, the scheme will be implemented for a period of 5 years from financial year 2020-21 to financial year 2024-25 in all states as well as union territories. So these can be said to be some of the important points with respect to Pradhan Mantri Matsya Sampada Yojana, which you must know from your prelims point of view. Further, let us also go through some of the benefits under PMSY as highlighted by the government. So the government highlights that under PMMSY, it will increase fish production by 9%, it will double incomes of fishers and double export earnings by 2024-25. Further, under the scheme, thrust will be given towards the following areas: enhancement of fish production and productivity, quality, sustainability, technology infusion, as well as post harvest infrastructure, modernization and strengthening of value chain, standards and traceability in fisheries sector from catch to consumer, thereby establishing a robust fisheries management framework for fishers' welfare, and enhancement of fisheries export competitiveness. So, under the scheme, thrust will be given under the following areas. So, it highlights that the scheme will overall help to create a conducive environment for private sector participation. So, this again becomes another important aspect: development of entrepreneurship, business models, promotion of ease of doing business, innovations, and innovative project activities, including startups, incubators, etc., in the fishery sector. So, overall, the idea is to increase entrepreneurship activities in the fisheries sector, and this will be done through private player participation or by the participation of the private sector. Now, according to this scheme, fishers, fish farmers, fish workers, as well as fish vendors are the key stakeholders in the fishing business, and they are also responsible for the overall developmental activities taking place in the fishery sector. And overall, the PMMSY will act as an umbrella centric scheme, and through the scheme, it will help in improving the socio-economic status of all the key stakeholders in the fisheries sector. So this is also one of the core objectives of the scheme, to improve or enhance the socio-economic status of all the key stakeholders in the fisheries sector. The next news to be discussed appears in the archive section on page number 7. And this news is about Hunter Committee report on Jallianwala Bagh massacre and was published in the Hindu newspaper 100 years ago. So in this regard, this particular report becomes very important from our prelims examination perspective, as questions can be asked on Hunter Committee report and its related incidents. So after killing of 379 people in Jallianwala Bagh, the British government appointed Hunter Committee to look into the killings of these people. Now the people in Jallianwala Bagh had gathered to protest against British Rowlatt Act, as this particular act allowed political cases to be tried without jury and certain suspects could be arrested even without trial. So The object of Rowlatt Act was to replace the repressive provisions of the then Wartime Defence of India Act 1915 with that of a permanent law. So, the British government came up with the Rowlatt Act. Now, Rowlatt Act is also known as Anarchical and Revolutionary Crimes Act of 1919. So, if a question is asked on Anarchical and Revolutionary Crimes Act of 1919, then do not get confused, and you must know that it is also referred as Rowlatt Act. So, in this particular news, apart from Hunter Committee report, you must also know about Rowlatt Act or Anarchical and Revolutionary Crimes Act, as the British government mainly targeted the revolutionary terrorists through this particular act. Now, this particular interview is an extract from the Hunters Committee report, and the Hunters Committee report is also referred as the Disorders Inquiry Committee. Now, this particular extract highlights about the interview of Deputy Commissioner of Amritsar, who was posted then in 1919. It says that as regards the Rowlatt Bill, was the meeting the subject of agitation in Amritsar itself? He said that very much so, there was a succession of meetings about it in which very strong language was used. Another question raised was, when was the first meeting held? The first meeting, the answer to this was that first meeting I have got note of was on February the 6th, and subsequent meetings took place upon the Rowlatt Bill. So from the extract of this interview, we understand that with respect to Hunters Committee report, even Rowlatt Act becomes very important for us to understand from our examination perspective. Now, this description has been taken from the official website of UK Parliament. It says that when World War I began in 1914, Indian citizens became heavily involved in supporting British war efforts through the provision of men and resources. However, by the end of the conflict, the appetite for Indian independence was growing, and simmering civil unrest in Punjab threatened a large scale revolt. So, on April 13, 1919, large crowds gathered in Jallianwala Bagh in Amritsar, consisting of non-violent protesters against British martial law. Now, here British martial law is referring to as the Rowlatt Act, and religious pilgrims visiting the site as part of Sikh festival Baisakhi. So, this protest was basically on 13th April 1919 on the festival of Baisakhi. So, it says that earlier in the day, a ban had been imposed by the British Indian Army which prohibited public meetings of such a size. Several troops surrounded the crowd and were ordered to shoot, and this killed an estimated 379 people in the Jallianwala Bagh and wounded hundreds more. So after this incident, the British government established a committee, namely the Hunter Committee. And the purpose of the committee was to inquire into the events of Jallianwala Bagh massacre. Further, the Hunter report includes evidence taken in relation to the events in Amritsar and was published by the then Government of India. So this particular news appearing in the archive section on page number 7, you must know about Hunter Committee report, about Jallianwala Bagh massacre, about Rowlatt Act, which is also referred as Anarchical and Revolutionary Crimes Act of 1919, and also the fact that Hunters Committee report is also referred as Disquiries Inquiry Committee. So we understand that this topic becomes very important from your perspective of history and culture, as in your prelims examination it gets covered under History of India and Indian National Movement, and in your mains gets covered under GS paper 1, specifically with respect to the freedom struggle, its various stages, and important contributors or contributions from different parts of the country. Considering the fact that this year completes 100 years of Hunter Committee report, so this becomes very important from your upcoming prelims perspective. With this, let's move on to our next news discussion. The next news to be discussed appears as an article on page number 7. It says, how India can become self-reliant. There needs to be significant government reinvestments in public sector undertakings as well as in research and developmental activities. So this article charts out as to how are we going to become self-reliant and what are the steps which the government must take so that in near future we become self-reliant. So what we understand is that government needs to invest somewhere. So the question remains that where are we going to invest so that we become self-reliant? Now in this aspect, the author says that there are two areas where both the public as well as private sector must invest rigorously or heavily so that in future terms we become self-reliant. These areas are research and development as well as education as well as skill development of human resources. Further, in this regard, the author also highlights that even the private sector must step up with respect to their investment in the research and developmental activities. So in this backdrop, this article highlights about India's historical model and also mentions about certain pitfalls where the Asian tigers leaped ahead from us. So with respect to historical analysis, the author has highlighted certain problems with respect to Indian public sector undertakings as well as private sector participation. With respect to public sector undertaking, the author says that India did not modernize their industries, that is public sector industries in 1970s and 80s, despite having one of the best industries in different sectors. So because of lack of any modernization as well as technological advancement of these PSUs, some of these PSUs which had potential for growth and development were either abandoned or undermined. Further, with respect to private sector, they did not invest much and remained content in protected market regime prior to liberalization. Further, most of these private sector did not show much interest in technological upgradation. So these were the two aspects where both the public sector as well as the private sector lagged behind as compared to other economies. Further, the author says that India also missed the bus with respect to third industrial revolution, with respect to manufacture of electronic goods, microprocessors, mobile phones, as well as with respect to global value chains. That is with respect to supply, distribution, as well as post-sale activities. And it is here where the Asian tigers excelled and leaped ahead of India. Now, this was because all these Asian tigers, including Hong Kong, South Korea, Japan, etc., they invested heavily in their research and developmental activities. And it is here where they leaped ahead with respect to technological advancements. Further, post liberalization, the private sector further shrunk as most of the research and developmental activities by then were either carried out by the public sector enterprises or mostly by the foreign companies. So, the Indian domestic private sector had hardly any investment in the research and developmental activities even post liberalization. So these are some of the problems as has been highlighted in this article with respect to growth of research and development in India. So in this regard, the author says that there are certain lessons which can be learned from the Asian tigers as well as China. Now these Asian tigers, namely South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, as well as Hong Kong, made heavy investments in technology in the 1970s. And as a result, they emerged as a global powerhouse in electronic goods, consumer durables, automobiles, microprocessors, personal computers, robotics, as well as heavy machinery. And the main factor behind the success of these Asian tigers was huge state investment in research and development. So as you can see, the time when the government of these Asian tigers invested in their research and development, the Indian government did not upgrade their technology with respect to their public sector undertaking. And it is here where these Asian tigers leaped ahead. Now with respect to China, it says that China on the other hand has become the global manufacturing hub and a leader in digital technologies with 3 of the top 10 digital companies from China. Now, another interesting fact is that India is one of the highest consumers of mobile phones, but India does not manufacture or produce any of these mobile phones. So, this again can be said to be lack of research and development by the private sector as well in India. So, overall, as a way forward, we can say that more investment is required, especially in the field of research and development by the private sectors, and also reinvestment by the government in certain public sector undertakings. So, overall, we can say that India needs to invest much more in their research and developmental activities, and this must be ably supported by the central as well as state governments. So, in this regard, India should focus on manufacture of electric vehicles, battery technology, solar cells, aircraft, including UAVs, artificial intelligence, robotics and automation, biotech, pharma, etc. Further, R&D investment should increase, which as of now is at dismal 1% of GDP. Further, private sector should invest more in research and development, and this must be supported by public sector enterprises. Further, Indian government should help the universities with greater resources and access for research and developmental activities. Next, government must focus on skill development in the field of artificial intelligence, data analytics, big data, 5G technology, etc. And in this regard, we must also develop a sound public health system with state of the art facilities. So these can be stated to be some of the steps with respect to self-reliance in near future. However, there is a need for massive investment in research and developmental activities, especially by the private as well as public enterprises. Now, this topic becomes important primarily from your mains perspective and gets covered under GS paper 3, especially with respect to technology as well as economic development. Now, after our discussion, this forms your question for the day. Now, this question was asked by UPSC in the prelims of 2012. The question is, the Rowlatt Act aimed at. Options are A. Compulsory economic support to war efforts. B. Imprisonment without trial and summary procedures for trial. C. Suppression of the Khilafat movement. And D. Impositions of restrictions freedom of the press. Now, coming to the answer of yesterday, the question was, which among the following are the provisions of Model Agricultural Produce and Livestock Marketing Act 2017? Options were 1. Provision for establishment of private market yard. 2. Single license for traders. 3. Regulation of APMCs by the center. And 4. Trading through ENAM. In this, the third option is incorrect, rest are correct. So the correct answer is C, that is 1, 2 and 4 only.